CBN prohibits sacking of bank workers. Honestly, for those people who still believe this thing is not having much effect on the economy, you really need to have a second thought on this. This thing is getting really serious. Now, first of all, I'm going to be telling you what is going on in the economy right now. I'm going to be showing you all the reasons why private sectors, that is companies in the private sector, always tend to downsize, that is lay off or sack workers when things get bad or when the economy is turning upside down. So I'm going to be explaining that reason so that most of us can understand what is going on. We can understand why these banks are doing this and why the CBN is trying to prevent them from sacking workers, so we can understand the dynamic happening all around in the economy. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you click on the notification bell so you can know when there is a new video. I post new videos every single day. So let's begin. Now, we have to understand that due to this economic downturn, that is why this thing is happening. So many companies now in the private sector are starting to lay off workers. It's one of the things that NLC has been complaining about since 1st of May. Many companies are starting to lay off workers. Not only that, even in government parastatals, it is starting to begin. It's like the purge is beginning. So we have to understand this thing is very serious. It's completely unsustainable for private sector. And of course, the CBN and of course, bankers committee has started prohibiting the removal of bank workers so that we won't have a complete collapse of the economy. We won't have people becoming destitute, because if families start losing their jobs now, let's say the main breadwinner, that is the breadwinner of the family, loses his job, it's going to cause a whole lot of breakdown in the family structures, across the country. So it's going to be very devastating. So that is what the government is trying to prevent, and that is why the CBN is prohibiting that and making it very difficult for banks to lay off any sort of workers or to furlough workers. It's very difficult. So it is very difficult for you now, let's say Access Bank, for you to sack your workers like you could before because of the economic downturn. And of course, it is not because these banks are being wicked that they're sacking the workers. It is not because maybe that company or this company is being wicked, this petroleum company or this airline company or whatever it is. It's not because they are being wicked that they are doing that. The reason why they're doing that is because the productivity has fallen, and productivity having fallen has led to a decrease in profits. So the profit margin of those companies has really fallen. If there is no profit, what are you going to pay your workers with? So the only way for the company to stay out of the waters, the only way for the company to be able to remain relevant and not sink with the tide of this crazy thing happening, this COVID-19 causing a drop in demand, because most people are just sitting at home. There is not hunger for demand. There's no hunger out there for services. So because of that, there has to be a drop in the number of people being paid in the workforce. That's the only way for the workforce to be able to sustain what is happening. That's the only way for the banks to be able to sustain and be able to survive on the other side of this COVID-19. So that's the reason why all these private sectors are doing that. It's not simply because they are trying to be wicked towards their workers. That's the reason. So if things are going well, if the economy is booming, if the economy is expanding, you will see an increase in employment. Companies are going to start employing more people. You're going to have a decrease in unemployment. Unemployment is going to start falling down. The unemployment rate in the country is going to start falling. But when there is an economic turmoil, when there is an economic problem around, which of course is something that this COVID-19 is causing, you're going to start seeing a decrease in employment, which means an increase in unemployment. And that is one of the reasons why I've been clamoring that in Nigeria, we have to have the unemployment numbers to understand what is happening, to understand the impact of the lockdown and the impact of COVID-19 on the economy more clearly. We have to be able to find that, to be able to understand it much more clearly. That's what we need. Countries around the world are having those numbers. They are able to compare those numbers with the desired result from the lockdown. So they can actually compare those two things. You can know those number of people who have been left destitute by the measures that have been employed by the government to be able to slow the spread of the COVID-19. Because Public policies are usually a way for you to compare two different things or multiple factors. You're not just comparing, you're not just taking decisions based on a single factor. So it's not only about the number of people who are going to die, you have to also consider the number of people who are going to lose their jobs, and you have to consider the number of people who won't be able to pay for the school fees of their children. You have to understand the number of people who are going to be chased out of their homes because they can't pay the rent. You have to understand the number of people who won't be able to feed their family members. These things are very important also. As much as we want to save lives, we have to understand these things are very important, and you have to weigh them against each other in order to understand how you balance this situation, because it's actually a balancing act. So that's the situation. So now we need that sort of number. For example, in the United States, they have over 30 million people now that have lost their jobs. People are queuing up at food banks, lining up for food. And these are not poor people. You have many of them with cars, lining up with cars for miles. So it's not like they don't have money before, or they didn't have money before. It is simply because of the lockdown and the COVID-19 and then the lockdown that made them to lose their jobs, because the companies they're working for cannot sustain them. The companies had to do what? Had to lay them off, because it is completely unprofitable for you to keep workers that you cannot pay and workers that are not being productive because they are sitting down at home. That is the reason. It's not the fault of the workers, it's not the fault of the companies, it is simply because of the situation on ground. This is exactly what they call a black swan event. It's something completely unpredictable, and it is very, very sad. It's going to lead to so many calamities. That's just the situation. It's going to lead to so many things happening around the country, but we really need to be able to deal with it. And of course, one of the reasons is so that the companies can also remain competitive, because even though there is a decrease in transactions in banks right now, there's still a little bit of transaction. You have to be able to compete for the number of whatever left customers, whatever customers are left, to be able to draw them towards your home bank. And of course, investors are going to be interested in banks that are downsizing right now, because it means you are trying to improve your profitability. So investors are going to be interested in banks that lay off or sack their workers. That's the honest truth about it, because it means that bank is trying to stay afloat and stay above the water, and will not, that bank is not going to collapse. That's what it means. So it means that your investment in the bank is going to produce profit at the end of the day. So that's the reason why banks do this, and all sorts of private entities do this in this sort of situation. And of course, for banks, it's even worse, because for the oil industry is completely bankrupt right now. They cannot sustain themselves. Just last week, there were even times, last week or 2 weeks ago, that the oil price in the world fell to negative. That means some oil companies are actually begging you to do what? To take the oil away and pay you to take the oil away, because there's no longer reservoirs for them to store the oils there, the oil they are pumping. So that's the reason. So it means oil had become so invaluable. So valueless to an extent that they could give it away free of charge. Not only that, they could actually pay you to just take it away. So that's the situation. So because of the collapse of the transport industry, especially the airlines, because most people aren't flying around at this moment, most countries are on lockdown, it's not very viable for you to just keep gallivanting all around the world, moving towards China or moving towards anywhere on planes, because everybody's scared right now. It means the airline industry is collapsing. And if that is collapsing, it means there won't be enough demand for oil. If there's not enough demand for oil, it means there's going to be a drop in the price of oil, a dip in the price of oil. And that is the situation. And most of these banks are the ones financing those oil industry. They're the ones financing those oil companies. And how are those oil companies supposed to pay up their debts now if the oil companies themselves are almost bankrupt? That's the problem on ground. That's the problem. So there's a lot of bad debts right now, a lot of bad loans on ground that the banks cannot deal with. And that is one of the reasons why they're trying to downsize their employees' load, so that they can remain afloat. So that's what is happening around the world. That is what is happening in the country. So we can just understand that. And of course, thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate that. Thank you for those people who have been subscribing. Make sure you subscribe to the channel once more. Make sure you share with your friends. It's really, really going to help the channel to grow. Thank you very much, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next segment.